Hey you all, Farmer Jesse here. Forgot to take those out. So, today I want to talk about what to look for when you're looking for land. And that goes for land that you're going to rent or land that you're going to buy. There are some very obvious things you would look for, and then there's some relatively less obvious things to think about. So, let's do it. All right, before we go on, if you like these kind of videos, if you're interested in this series, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Hit the like button at any point if you do like the video. But other than that, let's just talk about what to look for in land. So, here's number one. There are these are kind of the obvious things. The obvious things that you need to look for are water. You need some sort of water source. Maybe you can dig a well if it has no water source. That may be a possibility depending on where you're located. You know, in certain parts of the West, that stuff can get really complicated. You should know that if you're living out West, but make sure that you are following all your local guidelines, because the last thing you need is to be in a lawsuit because you broke your local water right laws. So don't do that. But if you have absolutely no water on your property, you're going to have to figure something out there. There are rain catchment options. You can do those off of things like high tunnels. Again, some places don't let you catch your own rain. That's kind of terrifying, but it is a thing. So be sure to check with your local water rights laws and just see what they say. Don't break any laws. It's not worth it. So that goes for creeks and ponds and all those things. Try to get as many water sources on the property that you're going onto as possible. And county water is nice to have too, just as a backup or as your main source. There are issues with county water. If you listen to this week's podcast with Elaine Ingham, she talks about some of those. For the most part, you're not going to have to worry about that much, at least not to begin with. But wells, ponds, all those things can be used as sources of water to irrigate, to water your livestock, etc. Flatland. That's number two. Flatland is huge. We don't have a ton of flatland. All of our land kind of lies like a little bit sloping, so it's not necessary to have completely perfectly flat land. It is nice. It is a nice bonus to have it. You may not find perfectly flat land. You may have to piece your garden together, as long as you can keep it relatively close, central, and not have to put one plot, 100 feet that way and another one a couple hundred yards that way. Like, if you can keep it all kind of together, that's a really nice bonus. If it's already wooded, that's not unworkable if it's flat. If you can tell that it's flat, which is hard to tell in woods, maybe you'll have to get a topographical map, but if you can tell that it's flat, you can hire a bulldozer to come in and just remove it. Yes, it's very harsh at first, but one step back to take two steps forward, right? So you may have to do a little of that. It'd be a little damaging perhaps at first, but all of that woods that you bulldoze out, you can pile into a big pile, and after a few years you can spread that back onto your property. So you'll lose a little carbon, but then you can bring it back on. So woods aren't entirely out of the, especially if you're buying, woods can be a little bit cheaper than clear flat land. So that is an option, and it is something to think about. And another thing that a lot of people do is they buy old growth woods, cut some for timber to pay for their pay off the interest of their farm, or just pay for that first few payments, and then they'll clear that area and grow in that, which is, as long as you're growing ecologically, you can make up some of that carbon loss and habitat damage and all those things. Another perhaps obvious one is proximity to market. You do want to be close to wherever you're selling, as relatively close as you can. Like, it's worth spending a little bit more money, and I think even Joel Salatin has talked about this, getting a little bit closer to your market versus living farther away and getting bigger land. Like, get a smaller property closer to where you want to sell. I think that 20-30 minutes, 45 minutes is probably about where I would max out. Hour's really rough. We've done an hour drive, and it can be kind of rough. It can be pretty hard. So just some things to consider there. Let's go to the less obvious ones. The first less obvious one would be which way the slope is. So we looked at this one property a few years ago, and it was beautiful. We really liked it. We thought everything was nice, and then we just kind of looked around and realized that everything was facing north, and that will cost you money. If your slope is primarily to the north, like this slope slightly to the north, and everything on this lower bed here grows slower than everything else. That's all garlic behind me. And same on this one you can't see right here. Everything right here on the north side of that slope grows slower than everything on the top side. So that is just something to consider. You may want to put trees, apple trees, something on the north side. That's a good place for them. It's a good use of north-facing slopes. But in terms of like vegetable production, that's something to consider. And same with grass. Our grass on the north side slopes doesn't grow as fast as the grass on the south side slopes. It's facing south, it's gonna grow faster because it's getting more sunlight. Another huge one for us, absolutely deal breaker, and you have to, we'll talk about this in a second, which ones are the most important. Neighbors. You have to have good neighbors. Your neighbors will be such an pivotal part of what you're doing, in as much as they'll help you haul your truck out with their tractor or whatever. They'll bring stuff over. Community is a huge element of farming, and if you have bad neighbors, it can ruin the experience. I mean, you can end up in court. And I've heard all sorts of horror stories. Neighbors in the country, all of farmland traditionally has been very shared, and you have to go into it knowing that a lot of the people that you're going to be living with have been living there for generations, and their family has hunted on your property for years. So there's going to be some amount of crossover that you have to kind of know those people, know that you can communicate with them, and then also be really respectful of that history and kind of try to become a part of it. That's just, a little bit of a digression there, but I think that's an important point. For us, we would have not moved to this property if our neighbors weren't so awesome. We love our neighbors. So, we had to meet them before we said yes to this property. So, absolute deal breaker otherwise. Another perhaps less obvious one is proximity to family. If you plan on having children or adopting or, growing a family somehow, your proximity to family will matter tremendously. If you like your family, we love our family, so it is important to us. Maybe you don't like your family, in which case you could just skip the next 30 seconds. Proximity to family is really important for them, for you, for your children, for your time, being able to drop off your kids in an emergency. Maybe you have to just get some crops out before a big storm or get some crops in. Just, Grandma, can you come over and watch the kids? It's huge. It's huge. And so that was one of the reasons that we left our last farm, is we were 3 hours away from family and we felt very isolated. And that, that played a huge role in where we decided to not live anywhere that was more than 35 minutes from where our family currently lives. And we found it. We found it for fairly cheap, luckily. Before I go on, I also want to say I don't have all the good ideas on this stuff. Any other input, any other ideas you all have, make sure to put them down. I know a lot of farmers actually are often commenting down here, and it's great. Make sure to read those comments, because some of them are wonderful, and they're things that I forget and don't say or don't think about. And so make sure to read the comments. But another one that I've been kind of thinking about lately is having the potential for multiple incomes on the same property. Not that I don't think you can farm exclusively and make your entire living off farming, but if you don't have to, it's kind of a nice bonus. So what I'm talking about here is maybe you have a nice barn that's kind of close to the road that you could turn into a farm stand. Or maybe you have an extra house on the property you can turn into an Airbnb. Or maybe the barn can be for weddings. Maybe the barn can be for seminars. Maybe the barn can be for, seminars and conferences. But having potential for multiple incomes, right? Revenue streams that are all kind of farm related or in that vein. Like, I always think about how I read this thing once that millionaires have something like 6 different revenue streams, and I actually looked that up. I can't find any real study on that, but it seems to be somewhere between 3 and 6 revenue streams for the average millionaire. And I just thought that's a really interesting thing to think, that not that we're trying to be millionaires, or any of us should be. There's money actually never ranks at the top of anybody's list, as far as I've seen, and I've looked, of things that make you happy, right? So you need to weigh that a little bit. But yeah, having multiple revenue streams will help. You shouldn't rely so heavily on your farming. You should do other things that you enjoy, or other things that can make money a little bit more easily, or other things that kind of contribute to your farming, like the Airbnb thing. Airbnb on a certified organic no-till vegetable farm, We live in bourbon country. I mean, that's a cool option. If we had a place to do that, that would be great. And that's one downside to this farm I hadn't thought about until we lived here, that we can't do a farm stand, we can't do weddings really, we can't do, you know, seminars and conferences because our road access is kind of funky. So that's just something else I would weigh. And then also you have to think about places to live. Does it have a place to live on the property? What would it be like to rent off the property? How much does that cost? What would it cost to build something? Could we just live in the barn? You know, all those things. You have to think about all the financial elements of it. So now how do you, so here's the thing, right? You're not gonna find that property that has all of those things. Not likely. You're gonna have to sacrifice somewhere. You're gonna find it, but you're gonna find that it's way out of your price range. Sit there, write everything that you want down, and rank them. 10, you know, give them a score of 1 to 10. What's the most important? And then you're just gonna have to look at properties based on the ones of those that are the most important to you. And you're not always gonna find the perfect property. That being said, you may very well find it. And I honestly think you could more easily find it by renting it than buying it, because buying it is going to be expensive. But if somebody already owns it and is willing to let you use it, you may be able to find a piece of property that is out of your price range traditionally, but since it's renting, you can afford it. So anyway, that's some stuff to think about. Like I always say, make sure to leave any comments, any ideas that you have down in the comment section. Spring is picking up, so these videos are going to slow down a little bit, but I'll be around talking about all this no-till stuff we've got going on. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video if you like the video, and we'll see you all next week. Thank you for watching. Bye.